Okay, Kelly. Thank you. I just wanted to say, of course, thank you for everybody for tuning in tonight and supporting the Royersford Library and the Springford Historical Society. And for those who have attended some of my Zoom talks in the past now, I guess, I don't know, I think Kelly, this might be like the eighth one or something like that, or for the and I love doing all of them. We always have really awesome turnouts, a lot of great questions, and I usually learn something from the talk. And so tonight's talk is actually kind of a little different than what I've done in the past. Some of the other ones I've done in the past have been, kind of about, strictly about history and, the history of the Underground Railroad or the history of Royersford in World War I or whatever it might be. This one I'm really kind of excited about because this one's kind of like about history, of course, and Civil War photography, which is one of my favorite subjects, but also something that's kind of current, something that I was able to partake in, and between me and my friend Paul, discover a collection of photographs that we're currently researching, and I wanted to share that with everybody and kind of talk about some of the research that we've done so far. That we just acquired these photos not that long ago. We got these in the late summer and early fall, and so we haven't had them that long. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about is very current. So how we did the research, the type of research that we've come across so far, and I'll show you a lot of the photographs that we acquired a part of this grouping, and share them with you, and I hope you enjoy it. So kind of give you a little background. So I was my friend Paul, who is on the call tonight, by the way, is one of my best friends, and me and Paul have been friends for over 20 years, and we both are big historians, and we love history, and one of our favorite subjects is photography, and especially Civil War photography. And Paul was at a flea market up in New Jersey, and one of our friends who also attends that flea market came to Paul and said, "Hey, I have this guy who cleans out houses in the area, and he cleaned out this house in New Jersey. And when he's going through the house, underneath the bed of this person in their bedroom was a box, and inside the box was a big grouping of old photographs." And he says that a lot of the photographs, they're Civil War soldiers, and there's some other things in the box, like photos of non-military, and some photographs that might have been pre-Civil War or post-Civil War, but they all were together in this one box. And our friend approached Paul and said, "Hey, I know you're really into this. Maybe you can shed some light on this. And also, hey, are you interested in maybe buying these?" And so had a couple photos phone and texted them to me, and of course, I could tell, number one, that he was excited. And when Paul photographs, we knew that this was something special, and we put our minds together, I guess, and came up with what we thought was a fair offer for the photographs that wanted to sell them. Had actually offered to them to a bunch of people who were antique dealers and stuff that were set up at that flea market, believe it or not, already. And some of those people were very dishonest guy. This guy had no idea what they were worth, and he at least had some sense to know that I think I'm being offered way too little bit of money for this, so I'm going to go to my friend Tom. And then Tom went to Paul. And so we put together an idea of what we thought was a fair price, because of course, we want to be able to, get these for a good price as well, but we wanted to be and offered the man. We had to wait a little bit, and I'm sure Paul can tell you, we went back and forth many times, and like, hey, did you hear from him yet? Is he going to take our offer? And then Paul went up to the flea market together, and we split it in half and went in on the photographs to agree that we would split the photographs amongst each other, and keep it fair, and then but yet amongst our friendship, of course. You're probably wondering, like, well, how the heck did you guys split these photos up? So, being that we've been friends for so long, we are able to do things like that. And so we literally, went, and since Paul really kind of was the one who really discovered the photographs, Paul, what we did was said, okay, we'll just do first choice type of thing. So Paul had first choice to pick whatever photo he wanted. And we all knew what photo Paul was going to take. And it was probably one of the coolest photos in the thing, but Paul got first shot, and it was only fair. One and one and one and one and back and forth. And we split it up. And so once we got the photographs split up, we also thought that, hey, maybe we should, there's got to be some sort of story behind these photographs. They were all together underneath someone's bed for Lord knows how long. And also, just from our experience through collecting Civil War photography and photography in general, that there seemed to be something up with the images, and that the fact that they were all together, we had asked that person who had gotten them, asked the people who actually got them out of the house, and said that those people said that, this wasn't from a collection. This isn't somebody that was collecting the photographs and like had a collection of pictures from like random spots, but these were from our family, supposedly, and they were always kept together in this box, and we don't know much about them, and that's all there is to it. So literally that day, we went back to Paul's house. We did the split up, picked what we wanted, and we just started kind of, we couldn't wait to kind of go through the photographs. And we started going through the photographs. And I'm going to show you a lot of photographs here that we're going through now. And here's a grouping of 8 of the images. Now, these photographs here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the photography as well as we go through this. And this photograph is called a carte de visite, which is a lot of times you refer to them as CDVs. Carte de visite is a French word, of course, for the term of this type of photography, which is actually on a paper image that is pasted onto a cardboard-like material on the backs. And on the backs of these images, a lot of times it would have the photographer's stamp on the back to show you who the photographer was, where it was taken. Nothing that's uncommon, that a lot of you probably have experienced, that you went and got your portrait taken, or, maybe not, people that are younger than me might not know much about that, but people that got photographs taken, of course, you knew who the photographer was, and the photographer a lot of times would put their name on the image. So on the backs of these photographs, it have where they were taken, the location, the name, and then sometimes people would write the names on the backs of the photos, which is, of course, what we're really hoping for here. And as you can see from these photographs, these are all Civil War soldiers. You have a couple soldiers here that are officers, regular enlisted soldiers, and they're all, of course, Union Army soldiers. Here's 3 more images that came with the grouping. And when we counted all the photographs up, there were 30, I believe it was 37 total Civil War soldier photos, and over about 50 some plus civilian images. So you're talking about, it was a collection of almost 100 photographs, and they varied in style. So you're going to see a couple of those different styles of photographs as we go through the talk. here's a photograph that's a little bit closer up. Very classic image of a Civil War Union officer. Now, really nice and clear, really cool photo of a little tinting on the image, showing that there was some gilding, gilded buttons on his jacket and on his shoulder boards, showing that he was an officer. And there was a lot of images like this in the grouping. On the back of the photograph, as I was just talking about, this is the photographer. We have obviously figured out, was a photographer, but down in Alexandria, Virginia. So this is going to be a big clue for us in researching these images, because we had learned to discover that a ton of the photographs were taken in Alexandria. So that's very interesting, because now, of course, this is during the war. They're in Virginia. They're in Alexandria, which is, of course, outside of Washington, D.C. And this is an area where there was a lot of Civil War camps set up, or occupation or guarding D.C. areas throughout the war. And, judging from the style of photograph, maybe what type of uniform they're wearing in the image, and also where the photographs were taken, we can start to try and pinpoint a date on the photograph. And there's a very good chance that this photograph here was taken somewhere around 1864 to 1865. And that's, towards the end of the war. So that's a little bit of a clue. And here's another image. So we were like, okay, well, this guy's kind of interesting. He's got a combination of things going on here. He has a military vest on, but he has a non-military jacket. That's a civilian jacket, military pants, and then really tight there on his jacket is a badge, which is what is called a 6th Army Corps badge. And so that was another clue for us. We're like, okay, well, that's cool. Me and Paul both like photographs of guys wearing their Corps badges. But interesting enough, this is upside down for a reason. I did do this on purpose, or I did this on purpose. This photographer was in Philadelphia. So we're like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. So now we have some photographs that were taken in Philadelphia. This tax stamp, this was something that was created during the Civil War. This is what you would pay for and put a tax stamp. This is a tax that you would pay. And so this stamp would date the photograph between 1864 to 1866. And on the top here is his name, which is really what you want. So you can see his name, Company E, 82nd Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. So, I'm sorry, Pennsylvania Veteran Volunteers at this point. So the 82nd Pennsylvania was going to be a really big key part of the story of these photographs, as you'll see as we go through this. And this was another one of the images. So when Paul picked his favorite photo, I picked two, and this was one of them. This photograph would refer to the uniform that he's wearing is a zouave. A zouave the term is also a French term, that the French military wore a zouave style uniform, and the American military, Union and Confederate, thought that those uniforms were, lack of better definition, were cool. And so you'll see these types of uniforms, all types of different versions, colors, design, gears different, the jackets could be different, ethnic connections, where there were some Irish that had zouave uniforms that wore green. There was a lot of, but for us, we were really interested in, okay, why is there a zouave soldier in this grouping? This kind of doesn't make to be with the 82nd Pennsylvania. But so we're like, okay, well, maybe we'll figure it out. But I'll talk about this here soon. This is a photograph of an original, or what we call the 23rd Pennsylvania Bernie Zouaves, who were primarily raised in Philadelphia, And this kind of gives you a really nice view of an original Zouave uniform that's in a collection. And so you can see the very different looking style. And some of these Zouaves were referred to as what they call fire Zouaves. So a lot of times, sometimes these Zouaves were recruited out of fire companies. So there could be like sometimes little connections with coloring with the red and the red piping on the pants there, as you can see in that image. Another image that was in the collection is this one. This is a really great photograph. Very interesting because this photograph here is actually an ambrotype, which means this photograph was taken on glass. This is a glass image, most likely early Civil War, so early period. Now we're going back some years, and we're like, okay, well, this is kind of different. He's holding a really cool early version of the American flag. His cap that he's wearing is a very good clue that is an early war, almost kind of like a militia style insignia that is on his headgear, and also his cockade that he's wearing on his jacket. So that is an interesting photograph that I am actually, and we're still trying to figure out, okay, what is going on with this photograph, and is this a direct connection with the other regiment, or is this maybe some other relative? We really don't know. But when you zoom in on this image, see how it looks like it's reversed? Well, that's because the image, when it was taken, it is reversed. I actually took this photograph when I scanned it and reversed it back to what you should see as a positive. It was originally a negative. So those letters actually were the other direction. So when I reversed the image, it says OG, which of course now is a term used for something else. But back then, this is probably something guards, most likely. And so we're trying to figure out this photograph, but it's a beautiful photograph. You see a little tinning on his face. Here's his cockade on the left side of the image there. Some tinning in his pistol, and a really cool American flag, a very patriotic image. This is one of the photographs that Paul has of a drummer boy. These are very desirable when it comes to collecting. And so to find a really nice drummer boy image is a find in itself. So that was very cool. As you can see, the photographer used a fake painted backdrop, which you're going to see in a couple of these images as we go through. This is something to kind of give something to the photograph when they would take this either in studio or outside somewhere. So here's the photograph that was, I'd say, our favorite from the grouping, and because I personally like this style of image. It's a photograph showing soldiers in their everyday camp life look and what they really would have looked like. So a lot of times when you see Civil War photographs, a lot of times they are studio taken, and they were looking very proper and cleaned up. But these photographs like this is kind of showing you what these guys would have looked like in the field. This is more of a real look of a Civil War soldier. And I scanned this at a very high resolution so we can really kind of study this image. But once again, one of the cool things about this photograph is, and one of the things that you hear quite a bit, and I hear all the time, is, well, they never smiled in photographs back then, or why didn't they? And well, here's a photograph of a guy smiling. And this photograph is most likely taken somewhere around 1864, probably. And this guy here is wearing a cap with a badge on the top of it, another 6th Corps badge. Okay. And then this guy here, both these guys, this guy on the left definitely has a 1,000-yard stare, and probably both of these guys were most likely in a lot of combat before this image was taken. This guy has his cap on the ground, and you can see that cross, okay, which is referred to as St. Andrew's Cross, or the 6th Army Corps badge, and a company H on the top of his forge cap. And on the bottom here, this is why I love this photograph. Here's their mess utensils, their cups, their plates. There's hardtack on there. There's bread. There's salt pork. He's holding maybe a piece of salt pork or a small potato on his fork. And then he's holding a coffee pot in his hand, like he's pouring some coffee. See the pot there? And that's just an awesome, awesome image. Fake backdrop behind them. That's a fake camp scene backdrop. Just not that long ago, recently, there's another big photo collector who posted a photograph on Facebook in one of the Facebook Civil War photography groups. Paul saw it and said, hey, wait, that looks like the same backdrop. And it is. So we figured out who the photographer actually was. And believe it or not, that photograph was taken in Philadelphia by a photographer who was known to use these props in this style of photography, which is really cool to me. And that was his style of photography, was to make this look like a camp scene. And it's just a killer image. And a lot of little hand tinting going on here on his pants. But I'm going to move on because I'll talk about this photo for like an hour or so. But just a really cool photograph. There's another connection here, as you can see, with that 6 Corps badge. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So here's a photograph of an original 6th Army Corps badge. You can see the blue. Okay, so the blue stands for 3rd Division, and there was red, white, and blue. Red, white, and Pennsylvania was in the 3rd Division. Okay, so we're like, oh, okay, here's another connection. These guys are most likely 82nd Pennsylvania. The 82nd Pennsylvania was actually in the war for the entire war, practically. They originally went in 1861 and were originally called the 31st Pennsylvania Infantry, and then renamed themselves the 82nd Pennsylvania. Nation got Pennsylvania Reserve regiments. This photograph was in outside of Washington, D.C. near Fort Slocum, and really early war image of this regiment that we have these photographs from. This is a photograph of Pennsylvania's battle flag. So as you can see from this battle flag, it is completely torn up and destroyed. And that shows you that these guys that were in so much combat, they were in a lot of battles during the Civil War. And this flag saw a lot of action, and all that damage is most likely from bullets passing through the flag, running through forests and getting ripped through trees and just all kinds of roughage. And this flag, a lot of these flags, these regimental flags, actually still exist, of course, in the collections in the state capitol in Harrisburg, and you can actually go and visit these flags, which is pretty cool. I've actually had the chance to do that one time. So I wanted to show you too, so that like when we got these photographs, some of these photographs were loose. They were already loose. They were like, just the individual images. And then there were 2 albums. So this album is one of the albums, what we refer to as like a CDV album. So you would open the book, and inside this, you would put photographs. So me and Paul were sitting there, and there was a lot of these civilian images. So I'm like sitting there reading them, and I could see writing, and a lot of it just said like Uncle Joe and grandfather Josiah or whatever, but I trying to pay attention to all the detail. Well, written in pencil at the top here, it's Civil War, Aunt Hannah Jolly. So I got excited pretty quickly and told Paul, and he was excited, of course. And so we were like, well, that's really interesting. This woman who's in here is identified as a Civil War nurse, and the name Jolly is throughout the album. So we're starting to think now that that is the last name of maybe the person who actually owned all these images at one point. So this is Hannah Jolly. So luckily there were 4 photographs of her in the album. So me and Paul split 2 up amongst each other. She is just a real classic looking 1860s female. She is identified on the backs of some of the images. This is one of the other photographs of her. And on the back, here we go again. So here's a random civilian photograph of a woman who's identified as a nurse. And it says the photograph was actually taken in Alexandria, Virginia. So once again, we're like, okay, so what's the connection here with Alexandria? This is very interesting. One of the things that we thought, of course, was she actually stationed at a Union Army hospital that were, a lot of them were set up in Alexandria, in Washington, D.C., and in that area. And was she the one that was actually there who was actually putting together these photographs of all these soldiers? This is another photograph of Hannah. And she was, obviously a young woman. And so the photographs are really coming together now. We're kind of like thinking there's a connection here. So Alexandria, Virginia, Philadelphia, 6th Army Corps, and the 82nd Pennsylvania Infantry, and possibly maybe some sort of connection here with these Zouaves. So the 23rd Pennsylvania. And, me and Paul have studied Civil War for a long time. And there's so much that goes into it when it comes to photography and the regiments and when they were enlisted and when they were discharged and this and that and uniforms. So that we're like, okay, well, is there a connection here going on with these two regiments? Because they were both in the 6th Corps. They were both in the 3rd Division, and they were both in the same brigade at points. So we're interested in, okay, there's got to be some sort of connection here going on between these two regiments. And then, of course, there's an image like this that is in there, which is a tintype. So, a lot of people, know the word tintype. It's literally taken on tin. It's a hard image. And tintypes really came in, mid-Civil War, 1863-ish, really got popular towards the end of the Civil War when that form of photography really shot up. And one of the reasons was this kind of replaced that glass image. And that glass image was, hey, think about it. You had one photograph. You had one photograph that was taken on glass. If you drop that on the floor, that's it. It's broken. You're done. So you had a tintype. Now it's more durable. It's cheaper. More people could get their photographs taken and afford that style of photography. This is really just a cool photograph of a Union soldier who was also obviously a musician. A very rare type of photograph. A lot of people desire this type of image, and that was part of the grouping. Now, this one also is an incredible photograph, but it also makes you cry a little bit because when we got this photograph, it was damaged pretty bad. And as you can see from the photograph, it was a beautifully tinted photograph of another Zouave soldier. But see that little piece there? That's an actual piece of the photograph that is flaking off of the image. The image itself is destroying itself, and it is almost gone. That is the blank tin behind the image. It is something that you don't want to see, but I wanted to show you all that. And I'm going to show you another one that was in the grouping that was damaged, but also talk a little bit about that, what causes that. So if you have old photographs, from your family or whatever, be very, very careful on how you store them. Do not store them in extreme temperatures, mostly on the heat side. Any sort of hot temperature that is going to most likely damage an image. You do not want to keep it in a hot temperature. Completely avoid it from any sort of direct sunlight. It will literally destroy an image. And I know Paul can tell you, we talk about this, and we literally have stories of it, of going to a flea market, seeing a photograph that's on glass, an ambrotype, laying out on someone's table. And you see it in the morning, and then literally went back, and it was laying out on the table in direct sunlight. and you know that's a no-no. Maybe within like 5 or 6 hours or so, maybe around that time frame, literally go back and the image is completely gone. All you see is a piece of glass. That's how quick sunlight can destroy these photographs. So if you have them, just be very careful with how you display them, how you store them, and just be very careful, because you don't photo. And knowing that this type of photograph that we're talking about, of course, it's going to be an old photo. You're talking about something that is Civil War period, most likely, and you don't want to lose that. You also, another tip, and something that I like to do, of course, is when you get these photographs, if you have a scanner, try and scan the photographs right away. If you have family photos, go through, just take time and scan them and make digital copies of them in case something happens to the originals. And here's the other nightmare. So here's the other tintype that was drastically damaged. Look how badly damaged this is. You can just make out his face. This would have been a great photo, but it is so damaged. You see how it cracked from the heat and the emulsions coming off of the image. It's bad. You see this a lot. So back to the CDVs, the paper images, which tend to last longer, can kind of take that, but the heat will definitely just damage these as well, and so will light. So be very careful. But this photograph is a really cool photograph. He looks so young, but he's wearing that big 6 Corps badge again on his cap. Okay, on the back of the image, he was very identified, for the most part. If you can try and make out that name on the top, you're pretty good. But we were actually able to figure this guy out recently, and identify him. And his actual first name was Gustavus, who was in the 82nd Pennsylvania, as you can see that identification again there, and taken in Philadelphia. A really good tip to do too is, as you can see what Paul did to this photo, is use pencil and identify where you got that photograph from. So he put on there, he found this with the Nurse Hannah Jolly grouping, and it came out of the album. Here's a really cool photograph of another civilian woman. Very, very tinted, purple, pink. This is done by the photographer by hand. Also taken in Alexandria. So who is she? Is she another nurse? Very good chance that she probably is. And then was a friend of Hannah. This is another photograph that was in the collection. He's wearing a special badge on his jacket, which is actually a rare cavalry identification badge. That little top part there is actually a horse head. So this guy was in the cavalry. So we're trying to figure out what's his deal. Another photograph here, very tinted. This guy was actually in a regiment called the 95th Pennsylvania. They were known as Goslin's Zouaves. A lot of the 95th Pennsylvania were from Philadelphia. A lot of them were from actually Norristown in Montgomery County. And he's wearing that very different style of jacket, which is a style of jacket worn by the 95th Pennsylvania. And also that unit, though, was also in the 6th Army Corps. And this is the one guy we're trying to figure out what his deal is. And it kind of gives a little bit of a clue, possibly. But this guy here is identified in the back. And he's actually in a regiment called the 9th Pennsylvania Reserves, who were actually had no connection really with those other 2 regiments. They were actually in the 5th Corps. And so we're trying to figure out what's his deal. And he's identified on the back. And so, but we're thinking that maybe he was also possibly a soldier that was in that hospital that nurse was in. And it was very common for people to exchange images. So those CDVs a lot of times were made in prints of 6. And they would almost trade them, almost like baseball cards, practically. And you would meet somebody. It was almost like a greeting card or type of thing. Where like, hey, here's my photo. And people would exchange these. And it could be what was going on here with this nurse. There was also this image that is also on an ambrotype. And she's wearing all black, and she is most likely in mourning, because she's where everything she has on is black, even her cuffs and her collar. Everything she has on is black, and it was a very common practice during the Victorian era of wearing, mourning clothing, wearing all black, black jewelry, everything. It was a designated period of time that you did that for. What her story is, we're not really sure yet. Was she related to somebody who was killed during the Civil War? There's a possibility. So we're trying to figure out what her story is. This photograph was randomly early picture of a dog that somebody obviously cared very much about and had that in the photograph album. Very cute dog. Everybody loves dogs. And I want to show you one of my favorite photographs that was actually in here. And then you're going to be like, "Well, why is this your favorite?" Because it's not a soldier, not content wise, it's nothing crazy. It's just like this little kid sitting in a chair. Well, this is actually in one of the albums, and I was actually starting to take the photographs out of the albums to make sure, if there was any sort of writing on the backs of these photographs. And on the back of this photograph was written this. Now you can see, number one, the heck, this photograph was taken in Corning, New York. This has very weird connection to anything else that's in these albums. But written in pencil on the top, it says, "This came from the battlefield at Winchester, Virginia." So the 82nd Pennsylvania fought in Winchester at the Battle of Cedar Creek. And so did the 23rd Pennsylvania. And what this was most likely a soldier. Maybe it had some sort of connection with Hannah, the Civil War nurse. We're not really sure. Somebody most likely picked this up off the battlefield after the battle, and maybe that soldier that she picked it up, they found it like maybe blown in the grass somewhere, or they possibly picked it up off of a soldier that might have been killed and found that photograph on that person. Stuff like this fascinates me. There's clearly just a full story just behind this one photograph. Here's another photograph of the 82nd Pennsylvania battle flag. They actually took this photograph. I wish we had this. This is not part of our grouping of photographs, but we would love to own it. But it's a photograph of the battle flag again, taken at the end of the war. And this was a very common thing that you would see during the Civil War. To show the damage, show the what they went through type of image. And it's just a great photograph. And here's a photograph here of the 82nd Pennsylvania monument at the battle at Gettysburg Battlefield. And not that long ago, a couple of months, back in the fall, me and Paul took a trip with our friends out to Gettysburg, and me and Paul were like, "Oh, we got to go out to see the monument and of this regiment that we got all these photographs from." So we went out and found the we knew where the monument was, went out and visited it, took some pictures and different things like that, and just trying to add a little bit more experience to the story. And so I'm going to circle back to some of the connections that we put together, and then I'll finish talking. And please feel free to ask questions. Any sort of questions that you guys want, and I'll be happy to answer them. But so what we figured out so far is, one, we know what regiment that these photographs are mostly based around, and it clearly seems to be the 82nd Pennsylvania. But then there's also the connection to that 23rd Pennsylvania, which were known as the Bernie Zouaves. What we found out was that when the 82nd Pennsylvania was mustered out of service in 1864, they re-enlisted, and that's what you would call a veteran volunteer regiment. So they re-enlisted from 1864 to the rest of the war in 1865. The 23rd Pennsylvania mustered out, but they did not re-enlist as a regiment. What was left of the 23rd Pennsylvania actually went in and re-enlisted with the 82nd Pennsylvania. So now we have our direct connection between those two regiments, and why there's a mix of photographs between the two regiments in these albums that belong to this nurse. So what we are, starting to piece together, what we, one of the last clues that we're really that's going to really kind of nail it down for us is that if we can find out for sure where Civil War nurse Hannah Jolly was stationed, and we really believe it's obviously most likely in Alexandria, Virginia, that she probably met all these soldiers at one point. Either they were wounded or sick and they were stationed at the hospital. And all the guys that she treated, she got photographs of them and collected them and kept them together in 2 albums for all those years and brought them back to her house in New Jersey. And we're under, in a house for, 150, 160 years. And now they belong to me and Paul. And we feel that we would love to put this story together, bring it to light, and share it with everybody. And, this is actually the first time tonight that's being shared with anybody. So you guys are, special for attending tonight. And we're going to be working on putting together an article for a really good magazine called Military Images, which is an incredible photograph magazine that's been around for a long time. And we're going to work together and put an article in the magazine about our research, and hopefully we can piece together some more things to this story. But what's really fascinating is this turned into a group of photographs that were literally almost sold to some random antique dealer that honestly most likely would have split them up because they would make more money that way, to a friend of ours who said, you know what, let me ask Paul about this. And it came our way, and we knew we had to have them. And once we got them, we didn't know any of this stuff. We didn't know there was much of a story between all this stuff. So once we start putting it together, it's almost like we were meant to have them. And so we want to honor the soldiers, obviously, the story, and put it together and share it with everybody. And, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about doing, historical research and being involved in the Springfield Historical Society, of course, and, different organizations, is, bringing those things to light so it's not forgotten. And, it's exciting for me, and we love doing it. So, we wanted to share that story with you tonight. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can actually say hi to me for real. And if you guys have any questions, now's the time to ask you. If there's any in the chat that Kelly might have seen already that you want to bring up, or if you just want to voice your questions, you can now unmute yourself. I guess you're good to go unmuting yourself, right, Kelly? And then they can ask if they want.
Should be okay too.
Okay.
That was in there, Paul actually snagged for you. So
Oh, good.
Thanks, Paul. That was great. If anybody didn't see it, Becky wanted to know how those soldiers were able to have their portraits taken if they were in the war, and whether that was when they were on leave or not. And Paul said photography was booming during the war, and photographers set up in many major cities and towns throughout the North and South. So it may have been when they re-enlisted in 1864 as veterans. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or do you think Paul covered it?
Yeah, Paul got it. I mean, that's what we're really, with a lot of these photographs that I showed, that's exactly probably exactly what happened is when they were stationed, outside of DC in a non-combat zone, they all rushed to the studio and got their photographs taken. And then when they were mustered out in Philadelphia in 1865, that's probably where some of those other ones were taken. So that's exactly it. Photography was so popular, and photographers would even follow around regiments and set up, in the field studio photography. And I see another question there. That might be something good question there. What was that?
What type of historical research have you done so far on Hannah Jolly?
So so far, what I've used was I used ancestry.com, which I have an account for, and I use all the time. So I'm going through her records, trying to find census records, where she lived, any sort of information on her when she was married, if she had children, where she's buried. And, what can get tricky with that, because she's a Civil War nurse, was at that time, most of the majority, Civil War nurses were not actually mustered into the military. They didn't receive pensions. They were volunteers. So unfortunately, when you come to like Civil War nurse type stuff, there are no military records, which can be really tough. But so when it comes to research for Miss Jolly, I've used that, some of those resources already. Me and Paul had a connection through somebody else down in Virginia who is the expert on Civil War hospitals in Alexandria, Virginia, believe it or not, and started going through all their lists. And we're trying to find her name, connected to anything. And that's going to be the biggest clue. That's going to be like the real kind of stamp on the story for us.
Mm-hmm. And what about the photographer in Virginia? Do you know anything about them yet?
Yeah, we're just kind of looking them up. I've found, so that Alexandria, Virginia photographer, there's actually a couple of them. So some of those photographs that were taken, they were not taken by the same photographer, but they were taken in Alexandria. Mm-hmm. And which is not uncommon. You would have had photograph studios, especially in that area, all over the place. So they just kind of really just would have walked into a studio and got their image taken. But we, that's part of the research as well, is researching that photographer. Like, when did that photographer operate? When did he have a studio? A lot of times the backs of the images give you the actual address. So then you can actually go really deep into it and see, hey, is that building actually still there? Which is, really cool. I'll give you an example for those that are interested in that. In Phoenixville, on the corner of Main and Bridge Street, there was actually a building that was on the corner there that there's a lot of old photographs of. If you look on the Historical Society website for Phoenixville, and on you can come across some of those images, and there was a photograph of this building that was there, that a huge skylight that was built into the side of the building, and that shows you that's where the photography studio was. So sometimes if you see like weird buildings like that, and you see this giant window that looks very odd, there's a chance that could have been a photo studio. There's one in Doylestown that is really cool, and you can clearly, when you look at the building, you're gonna be like, that's a very weird window, and there's a reason for it, because they had to use natural light to get into the studio. So, but yeah, so we're, part of the research will be definitely the photographers.
Mm-hmm. Neat. We did have someone ask if you could pull up the image that's on glass again. It looked like they kind of saw some kind of a distortion, or maybe like a second image underneath it, or if it maybe was just shadows.
It was probably just shadows. Yeah, because I took all the photographs out of the cases to check, actually, to see if there's anything behind the images, because that could be a sign for us. I'm really kind of hoping that some of those glass images were in cases, to take them out and see if there's anything written behind them. And unfortunately, there wasn't anything behind any of them, which kind of stunk. But the glass image, there's definitely nothing behind it, which sometimes you luck out, sometimes you don't with that. But
okay. Brittany is wondering if the images were collected by the nurse were the soldiers that she treated, or ones that had passed away. Like, what's your main theory here?
So we're pretty sure that none of those soldiers so far that we've found, because we've researched those names that we've been able to identify, and none of them actually died during the war. So we're thinking that there could be this connection that she treated them. And one of the kind of clues to that is that, obviously there's several of the images were identified to one regiment, the 82nd. But then you had the other ones for the 23rd Pennsylvania, same corps, 6th Corps. But then you had this couple rando guys, like the cavalry guy, the Pennsylvania Reserve soldier. Like, where the heck did they come from? And it kind of almost leads you to believe that she treated them as well. And that's why she had these random photographs of guys from other regiments.
Mhm.
So, and other civilian women taken in Alexandria too. So we think that some of these other women that she had were probably her friends that were also probably nurses. Unfortunately, those ones are not identified on the back. And so that's going to take a lot more work to figure out who they are.
It's a very interesting theory. And when you think about it, I mean, being a nurse would be one of the best places to meet a bunch of people from a bunch of different places. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense that that's where all the gathering occurred. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
absolutely. Yep. That's very common. That's why me and Paul thought that, because we've seen it before. It's a thing. It's a common thing that
Mhm.
you would see from Civil War nurses.
Very cool. Jackie has had her hand raised for a little bit, so I'm gonna let her ask her question next. Go ahead, Jackie. Are you still there, Jackie?
Oh, maybe lost her.
Hey, am I there?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you
Oh,
now.
there she is.
I was curious, obviously you're very familiar with dating of photos. I have photos that are on tins. What does that mean in terms of the time frame that they would have been taken?
So if you have a tin type, if you're just basing it off of the style of photography, a tin type is generally taken, you're going to look at probably mid 1860s all the way through into the 1880s.
Okay.
So probably around like a 20-year time frame that was when they were produced the most. Once in a while, and this is actually kind of funny, and it's not common, but I've seen them. I have a couple of them. You'll actually see tin types sometimes taken in the 1940s, believe it or not. It became like a novelty thing that sometimes you would see down at like Atlantic City.
Mhm.
And so sometimes you'll see like a tin type of like two World War II soldiers, and you're like, what the heck? And it was like almost like a novelty. It was almost like something you would do now with an older style photograph. So, but generally, not most likely what you have there is probably somewhere between the range of 1860s to 1880s. And if you look at the clothing, that'll be the best way to identify the date range the best.
Yeah, right now I'm looking at these, and honestly, they look like they'd be off of they look like they'd hold up a stagecoach. They look like that kind of like hats. They look like I don't know. It makes me think of the Wild West more than it does make me think. But their hat, they're rounded top hats. One's in a top hat. The other one's almost looks like a military hat. But they're interesting, and they came with all these, and of course in tin types you can't write in the back and see who these people are, but they must be relatives because they came like your collection in a box.
Yeah, that's cool. So I mean, if they're wearing the type of clothing you're describing to me, sounds very like 1880 to me.
Mhm.
So like, it sounds like that late 1870s, early 1880s, like, time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Didn't someone that missed the very beginning, that if you could just go over how you acquired these again quickly?
Sure. As quick as possible. That I'll tell you that we acquired these between me and my friend Paul, a friend of ours who we know through a flea market up in New Jersey. He knew a guy who does house cleanouts, who literally knows nothing about antiques really, and especially Civil War photography. Was trying to sell them to people at a flea market. Everybody was lowballing them. So he went to our friend Tom and said, Tom, do you know anybody that can be honest with me? He said, yeah, I know this guy, Paul. He showed Paul. Paul shared them with me. We said, wow, these are awesome. We have to have them. And me and Paul split it in half. We went half and half, bought the photographs, and then split the collection between the two of us so we can keep everything together. Best way to describe it, I guess.
Great, thank you. How about the frames that are on the pictures? Were they original, or did you have some that you added?
Nope, that's all original. Everything you saw tonight is exactly how they came and exactly what they would have came like. So those frames were what they call them. They're mats. So they're actually copper or brass matting, most likely, usually brass mats that were stamped, fancy designs, beautiful designs, and that was the common style for an image to be in we call it a photograph case. I'm going to hold one up here. This is just behind me. This is not from the collection, but I want to show you a case. This is a case here. Okay, that's actually a daguerreotype. This photograph is actually from the late 1840s, but that's a case. So those photographs were in some of these cases like this. So they would have had this matting all around the edges. And so the earlier the photograph, usually the less fancy the matting. So you can see that one's very plain. Well, in the 1860s, it got fancy. And you'll see, very typical 1860s, kind of gaudy Victorian stuff going on, and patriotic as well during the Civil War.
And then which came first, the glass or the tin type?
Glass.
Gotcha. I'm going to let Wendy ask her question next. Go ahead, Wendy, whenever you're ready. Wendy, are you still there? All right, we'll come back. Have you been able to research the soldiers' records at the National Archives in DC? Their paper records have details of each soldier's injuries, treatments, and their military, pensions, jackets, maybe hammock listed in details of their medical treatment.
Yeah, it's a great question. When we dig deeper into each individual soldier, we definitely can use that resource. Luckily, there are some really good online resources for Civil War soldier databases that are not necessarily, Ancestry does have them. Paul has a subscription to a Civil War soldier database that's been around for years. If you look at how the website's designed, it literally looks like it's from like 1996, but it's the ultimate resource guide, because you can literally put that soldier in and it's going to tell you as well if he was wounded, if he was decorated, what regiments he was in, if he was transferred, if he was sick, if he was stationed in a specific hospital at times. So that resource is really huge, which we've used already multiple times for these soldiers. But when we start digging real deep, we definitely could go to the National Archives and request their full military records and pension records and everything. And of course, that's going to tell us even more if we need so. That's a good question.
All right, I think Wendy is back now. So go ahead, Wendy, you can ask your question now.
Hi, I have a girlfriend that has images of military soldiers that are on glass that are the negatives. I think one of your pictures, you said you had to invert it. She has no idea what to do with them. She's kept them. She cleaned out her mother's home. And is that something anybody like you would be interested even looking at? I think there's just like 4 or 5 of them. I don't think there's like a huge collection, but she's kept them all these years and felt like it was a piece of history. And she doesn't know, they're not appear to be family members or not that to her knowledge, they're anybody in their family, but their service, on these glass, but she calls them the negative or the, So I don't know. I don't know if that's something she's been trying to figure out what to do with them,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something for sure that I'm interested in. I'd be more than happy to help. Does she live locally? I live right in Royersford. So,
well, I'm in Royersford, so she can come to Royersford. She's one of my best friends. She lives up in Coopersburg, like up in Lehigh Valley area.
Sure. Yep.
So, but I mean, she comes to see me in Royersford, so I can always make her come down here and, and I even have, this is earlier, but I was going to take them down to the Royersford. I have a packet of the food stamps from my parents and my grandparents from Philadelphia, how they got the books during World War II, and they're actually in the leather satchel and everything. And I know my family's just not a collector. So I didn't know, again, should I just contact the museum and say,
Sure.
I'm willing to donate these. And I mean, they're so interesting, but I don't want them to get, I know when my kids clean out the house, they would just throw them. What I mean? They would say,
Yeah.
oh, this is cool, but who cares? But
Sure.
they're, stamps that actually some of the books still have stamps they didn't use for rations during the war in Philadelphia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like, contact us at the Springford Historical Society.
Okay.
We'd love to have something like that. We can use it for displays and different things like that. And
Okay.
yeah, and definitely, like, I don't, is there a way, if you can get in contact with me about those photographs, I'd be happy to look at them. They could be, really anything, if they're on glass, they could be that Civil War period. They could be a little bit later, but if they're negatives, they're going to be, early. They're going to be, earlier images.
Right.
So,
I mean, she just wants, again, like mine, we want them just to go to somebody that, finds them neat and would, have them for other people to see or whatever.
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'll follow up with you at some point. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, that's going to be your best spot to contact them. And it looks like Francis is next, so go ahead.
I didn't. Oh.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Of your identified images, you talk about the resources that tell you all about the soldiers' records. Of the identified images that you have you researched those to the point to find out if they were wounded during the war, that they would have had reason to be in the hospital?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the images that I showed tonight, we just found out that he was actually wounded twice. So, and he was, and one of the dates definitely could correspond because he was wounded at the Battle of Cedar Creek, which was in 1864. So there's a chance that he would have been, especially in Virginia, Cedar Creek, Virginia, near Winchester, that he might have been moved to a hospital in that Alexandria area in 64. And that really could correlate with the story and the nurse. So that was a really big clue for us. There were some other guys that were definitely wounded as well. So we're slowly going through those names and trying to see, like, if they were wounded, if they, they could have just been in the hospital for disease. So we're trying to figure that out, but we definitely have come across some already that it kind of it's already starting, makes sense.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Thank you.
Is there any way that you could go back and find out more information from whoever had owned the house when it was cleaned out?
So we would love to. We asked our friend Tom to ask the guy that we got the photographs from, hey, do you know, is there anything you can tell us about these photos? They're from the family, like, what's the deal? And the only thing they said was, we do think that these are from the family, but we don't know anything about them. They said that they know that they weren't like somebody that was a collector that just pieced them together, but they've always been together. And as far as they knew, they were just passed down in the family. And, so we were kind of, sometimes that happens, sometimes you luck out and you get a little bit more information, get some names. kind of piece stuff together, but we really didn't get much information on that end of it. That kind of was, we kind of started from scratch kind of. And luckily, thank God that not only were some of the soldier images identified, because they're not all identified, but that little writing about the nurse in the album really brought the story to a lot more, realization to what was going on there. Because if she wasn't identified, then we might have any idea of the nurse connection at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, just that little stuff. Always write names on the backs of your photos.
Wendy, did you have something else to say? There's a little bit of background, so every time you unmute, there's an echo.
Oh, is that what it does? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My thought was, has anybody thought to, do you know the address of the house? Because, open records, even in New Jersey, I know you're talking New Jersey versus Pennsylvania, but in that county, you can go into their county records and go back and see who owned that house over time. I mean, they're all public records. So another way to look at it is see the house. I mean, this is just, I love to do research, and me and my friend, if I knew her name, I would ask her. She's like a whiz on Ancestry. I mean, she finds stuff that I don't know how she finds it on Ancestry, but I was thinking you could take the address of the house and kind of reverse back and see the history of who owned the property. And that might help you put some names and family together. It's just a thought, but it's one way I would consider.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, big time. Right now, we don't even know. I don't even know what the house looks like or where it was, where they came from.
You don't have the address of it. Okay.
No, because the guy didn't want to share that information. So
okay.
That was it. But so I'm trying to piece it together through the census records, and with her name, and I'm getting, obviously with the early census records from 1860, 1870, it doesn't give you house numbers. Which drives me nuts, but it'll just tell you oh yeah, this is the town it was in, and that's it. So
okay.
But if we keep digging, hopefully we'll be able to find something. Maybe what I'm trying to find is her death certificate, because if she died a little bit later on, it might actually have her address on it. So yeah, that's another thing I'm working on.
Great. I did have another person ask, do you have an idea on the percentage of soldiers who had their picture taken in the war?
No. That would be, I wish I had an answer to that, but yeah, that's impossible, because you just don't know. I mean, it's really a shot in the dark, and I'd say, I'd say it's a safe bet to say at least half, but it's hard to say, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was the last question in the chat. If anyone else had any questions about their own artifacts or anything, Dave Willauer from the Historical Society did stick the society's email in the chat there, so feel free to use that for any of those questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if anyone has any last comments, feel free to unmute yourself at this point, or we're going to wrap up for the night. Okay. Oh, Wayne, go ahead, Wayne.
How you doing, Ryan?
Oh, hey, Wayne, how's it going?
Wonderful. I enjoyed the picture of the 95th guy in there.
I bet you did.
I just want to mention in the military images, so one of the issues I have from the 1980s, it actually had a picture of my great-great-grandfather that was in the 95th.
Oh, really?
Yes, and the photo was taken in Norristown. He was on leave after being wounded, came home and got married, and that's when he had his picture taken. And I copied it out of the magazine. I was really shocked when I bought the magazine. There's his picture in there. So,
that's awesome. That's really cool. Honestly, Wayne, every time I think of the 95th, I literally think of you, like literally every time.
But,
I'm not kidding.
it'd be good when the article is in Military Images, which I have a subscription to, that somehow that could be noted in the either on page or Facebook or something, so other people could maybe buy the magazine. It's a little pricey, but it's a great magazine.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, when it comes out, I'll share it myself, but I can, tell Kelly at the library and maybe, something out just to say, hey, remember this talk, type of thing, because, hopefully even by then we get more of the story too, as well.
Also, there's another organization I belong to called the Center for Civil War Photography, and it's run by Gary Edelman, who's a ranger out in Gettysburg and also works for the Battlefield Trust. So each year we meet and do a lot of before and after photos, and also soldiers' locations and things like that. And author Bill Frazanito is a member of that group too. So he speaks occasionally. So, but a very good presentation.
Thanks, Wayne.
All right.
Do you know if that magazine sells individual editions? Like, can you find that in the massive magazine section in the supermarket, or do you have to
I don't think so. That's why I suggested the Ryan.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's a little pricey too. I've never seen it like at Barnes and Noble or anything. It's and if you what's the gentleman's name? Ron Covington, right? Or
yeah, that's it. Yep.
Yeah, he's the author. Sometimes if you get onto their site, the Military Images site, you can contact them, and he may be running a special on, if you contact me, I'll send you a free copy, or it may not be the most recent edition issue, but that's a way you can make a contact with them. And
so would people need a subscription then, or would they be able to go?
You could buy individual copies of that, because I had to buy a couple back copies to complete my collection. So
great, good to know.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you everybody for coming out, and a huge thank you to Ryan. Fantastic as always. You never ever disappoint. So I hope everybody has a fantastic night. Enjoy this new weather that we're getting, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for coming out.
All right, thanks everybody. See you later.